Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. You can really help the show reach more loss and infertility families by taking a moment to leave a positive review or rating on Apple or Spotify. You can also check out more information about the episode in the show notes at journeyforjasmine.com. In this episode, I talk with Dr. Ashley Hudson. She's a faith-based therapist, educator, and sexologist who brings so much warmth, honesty, and humor to conversations regarding intimacy and healing. We talk about how fertility treatment, pregnancy loss, postpartum depression, and the weight of grief can impact relationships, and how couples can rebuild connection and intimacy with compassion and communication. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Ashley Hudson. Ashley, can you tell us a little about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I am a therapist in private practice. I've recently finished my PhD in clinical sexology, and I work a lot with the perinatal population. So I specialize in treating conditions like postpartum depression or perinatal anxiety. And that is really what my practice has solely focused on since 2018. And as I was leaning into treatment with folks, I just noticed some recurrent issues surfacing around intimacy during that perinatal period, whether trying to conceive up through early parenthood, and just the variety of forms those challenges can take are pretty vast. And I didn't feel equipped. So that's why I pursued my PhD in clinical sexology. And now, I work with a pretty broad population, but I'm typically working with folks in that perinatal season, those who are trying to conceive, and talking about issues related to sexuality and intimacy, both for individuals and for couples. So a lot of people think I just do couples work, which makes sense, but I actually do a lot of one-on-ones with mamas. So that's kind of the bulk of my work.
That's really interesting. I feel like not a lot of people have degrees or specialize in, clinical I can't say the word, sexologist.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of unique. I find myself in a lot of like funny conversations, with next to strangers in an airport. Like, what do you do?
Like, what do you do? Oh, well.
Complicated.
So,
Um,
what got you interested specifically in like perinatal health? What led you to that?
yeah, my own story. So I had pretty severe postpartum depression after my daughter was born. And I, at the time, was already a trained clinician and worked in the field. And that was in 2015. So it wasn't too long ago. I guess it was like a decade ago, but resources were much more sparse even just then. When it came to perinatal mental health, the closest support group I could find was a 45-minute drive, and I lived in the Denver metro area. So that says a lot. And I had a colicky baby. So driving 45 minutes with a screaming baby was not an option. And it was pre-COVID. So there weren't a lot of online resources to access. And yeah, I just was drowning and was in a really dark place, and talk a lot about that story in other areas. But ultimately, I came out of that with my diagnosis and treatment plan and was able to kind of climb out of that season, and obviously grew really passionate about serving other moms. And that's the story of a lot of us who specialize in perinatal mental health. You'll find is that many of us have our own stories of suffering and want to make the world a better place. And this is how we're kind of doing that. And so, yeah, that's ultimately how I ended up focusing. And I work a lot among faith communities. I'm a pretty outspoken Christian and identify as that. And so, because of that, I have found spaces like various faith spaces where they've really wanted me to come bring just data and information about perinatal mental health, which has been really sweet like from a personal part of my story, to be able to insert kind of research and data into faith in a way that's really meaningful to me personally. So, yeah, that's a little bit about how I landed in the realm.
And I'm so grateful that there are people like you that are helping because it's hard. Postpartum's hard. And especially, if you've never, even if you have been through it before, each time is different, but it's so isolating and you're just kind of left alone as like, okay, you had your baby,
Yeah,
like have fun,
figured it
and
out.
you're like,
Yeah,
what do I do?
it's terrifying. Totally.
It is. Now, I know it's kind of a myth, but do you find that being faith-based and also studying intimacy, that those things clash, or do they actually go hand in hand?
Oh, they clash a ton. I
Yeah.
talk a lot about how it feels like I don't really fit in anywhere sometimes, depending on the day, because either I'm canceled by, sometimes the sexology community because I err or I stand among a people of, more conservative faith beliefs, and that's kind of taboo in that space. But then in the Christian space, I like study sex professionally, and that feels taboo in that space, and depending on the congregation and the community. And so it does feel like a very odd place to be sometimes when it comes to like social location and belonging, but I've learned to feel comfortable with it. But yeah, it's definitely comes with very unique challenges.
I would bet it would. And I feel like you would have to be a pretty, not, I don't know if tough's the right word, but a little thick-skinned, I guess, to
I know,
to
I'm like constantly like, Jesus, I just need like, yeah, I need to care less. And
that's
it's not,
hard though.
that's not a prayer that's getting answered over here, but that's okay.
Yeah.
A day at a time.
So why is it that you think things like intimacy and sex are so hard to talk about for so many people?
I mean, I think that because we're all socialized in different ways, but for a lot of us, especially in this generation, coming out of what was considered an abstinence only education model or education system that really promoted abstinence only as a form of contraception and safety, and lacked robust, comprehensive sexual education. A lot of us came to adulthood with limited information. And whenever there's silence in childhood, it very frequently translates to shame. If people aren't talking about it, it must be bad. And I have found that shame is something that, as a clinician, I work with every day in the therapeutic space because it's such a barrier to fullness of life. And shame is so deeply intertwined with sex and sexuality because so many people, the concept of sex in their bodies or their genitals specifically was shrouded in silence or misinformation. And so it got like neurologically, we say fired together, wired together, but it got neurologically wired together with a shame narrative that says, I'm bad, something must be wrong with me. And so that's a very simplistic, overly simplistic way of describing kind of why I think it is so hard to talk about for a lot of people because so much of it is embedded in a concern that something's wrong or broken with them.
Which is really sad that so many people, I mean, myself included, I've, been through that too. And it's really sad that so many of us feel that way about something that is a natural part of being a human, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're given for the most part, broadly speaking, two models, either, abstinence and zero information or a pornified worldview and information. And those extremes are just not reality or healthy. One breeds, perhaps some realistic expectations, and the other breeds confusion and shame. And so I think we're kind of caught in the crossfires of that a lot of times.
Yeah, there needs to be some kind of like middle ground there, but it doesn't seem to be happening.
Totally. Yeah. It's really sad. Hmm.
So what are some ways that you help people kind of be more open to talking about intimacy and their needs and things like that with their partner?
I mean, a ton of it comes down to modeling. We say there's a model of treatment for sex therapists called the Plicit model, and it begins with giving permission through our own way of speaking. And so, saying, I don't even know if this is an explicit podcast, so I never know when
Oh,
I'm
it's
on
okay.
podcasts what words I'm allowed to say and not say, but like actually calling genitals what they are called, using actual terminology that is accurate when talking about intercourse and sexual behaviors, and going first in those conversations, even in the therapeutic space. So it might feel shocking or seem shocking to some, but asking, tell me about the last time you had intercourse. What did you enjoy about that? Is kind of a modeling of using the correct language and how to talk about it with a regulated nervous system. And so a lot of it's just practicing in the therapeutic space and giving literally I'll send people home with scripts or conversation starters. Like, here are some questions that I just want you to sit with, or I'll send them home with worksheets. They obviously don't have to turn them into me because it has a lot of private information on it, but just to fill out even on their own to consider their sexual templates, what they like, what they haven't. And when we're talking about mothers, that's really important because A, they're often socialized and conditioned to not think of themselves, but B, they're also oftentimes not familiar enough with what their sexual landscape and template is, what gets them excited, what gets them aroused, what kind of cultivates desire for them, and what crushes it. And so creating that insight for themselves and then bringing that into a substantive conversation with their partners through kind of literally worksheets and conversation starters is a lot of what I do.
I
Mhm.
mean, it makes a lot of sense though, because I think sometimes we don't even know the questions to think about or the questions to ask. I mean, we just don't think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in those like in the trenches of, these age 0 to 10 kind of years and trying to conceive, like this season of time is really complex. There's a lot of mental gymnastics going on. And sometimes sexual pleasure just feels like a piece that can be set aside for now. But it is so important to embracing fullness of life. So
So do you work with people who are going through like infertility, who are, dealing with like IVF or other treatments and are having to do like scheduled sex and, how that can really take the intimacy out of things?
absolutely, all of the time. Yeah, it gets really hard when we're talking about the folks struggling to conceive that population because sex becomes a job. It becomes a check on a box that, you've got to complete this task. And it becomes very goal oriented. And we talk all the time as sex therapists about taking goals outside of like just getting rid of goals when it comes to physical and sexual connection, like not even involving orgasms as a goal, because it really can just be one outcome or one experience someone has that's sexual. And I share all that to say that goals can really crush desire because it can create such cortisol and like heightened arousal of the nervous system in a way that shuts down the parts of your brain that would say now's a good time to be intimate and romantic and have sex. So those are competing in the brain. So when you have a goal like conception, that makes sex really tricky because it shuts down any sort of desire or any sort of like romanticism. And so a lot of times I'm working with couples saying, okay, we're going to have baby making dates and then we're going to have love making dates, So we can still involve this goal of procreation and growing your family, but let's do that hand in hand while also really cultivating connection and spark between you two so that it doesn't all become about completing a task.
So basically, not every time you have sex is just to try to get pregnant.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And broadening your touch and your intimacy menu so that it isn't all just intercourse, so that folks can wire their brain around comfort with a variety of touches because so often the folks who are coming from that space of trying to conceive experience what we call the bristle effect, where their partners will come in for a hug or like just touch them on the back and it's like their whole body clenches up and they bristle at the thought of their partner pursuing or, initiating with them because of all that it's come to represent. And so by broadening that, by hand holding and cuddling and sometimes just kissing and sometimes just, giving a massage, you're able to kind of rewire the brain around what touch could mean and represent.
It's also interesting because it's things that you just don't think about when you're just, in the battlefield of infertility. You don't think about like, oh, maybe my partner has a bad association with it now because of, like you said, like
Yeah.
what it represents.
Right. It could represent failure. It could represent yet another argument. It could represent a risk that they aren't wanting, that comes with so much grief and anxiety. And same goes for loss,
Mm.
right? Sex becomes something that represents an entirely new area of emotional existence that wasn't expected. And that's really hard.
I feel like with loss, since I mean, I've been through both infertility and loss, but loss hits the hardest for me personally because it brings like that whole level of fear now, like the fear of getting pregnant, but also the fear of not getting pregnant. And, it's like all of this fear that it seems to culminate.
Right. And
Yeah.
fear is like, yeah, it's like a fire hose against arousal.
Yeah.
It's not something our bodies and brains aren't meant to erotically open up when they're afraid. We're built to get small and protective and not procreate when we're afraid. That's
Yeah.
on purpose. Our brains are wired that way. So when our nervous system is saying there's something threatening going on here, we're going to want to not have sex. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. And it takes a lot of like work, therapeutic work to be able to heal and to grow connections neurologically that tell you, okay, sex can represent other things too, besides risk, besides potential loss, besides et cetera, et cetera. And that's hard when the body becomes a place in which loss happened or grief lives, to simultaneously experience the body as a place where love lives and life lives can be really hard tension to hold. And it's important to go slow and not have a timeline.
No, I definitely agree with that. Going through things like that, you have all the conflicting emotions all at once. So a lot of anxiety, but still you have hope, you still have fear, but you have love. And it's like learning to deal with them all at the same time and know that it's okay to have both feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
And then, I mean, when you have a partner, the other complexity and piece of it is like, okay, for some, they're part of grief and re-engaging life is touch. They need to be touched. They need to feel alive in their bodies. And for others, it's space. I need to like have a minute to heal and to restore relationship with my body before I can share my body with anyone else. And so being able to just name like, hey, I think our bodies grieve very differently. I think that the way we're processing this is different, not bad, just different, can really help take the like, because it can so easily be misinterpreted as sexual rejection or disinterest, when in reality it's grief manifesting in the bedroom.
And of course, it always comes down to communication, which a lot of us are not always great at, even with our partners. But
Yeah.
yeah, being able to have those conversations, it can be hard because like you said, you don't want them to feel like you're rejecting them or you don't want to feel rejected by them, but it's hard to sometimes put that into words.
It's so, I mean, even just simple phrases like, I really miss connecting physically and I know your body's not ready yet and that's okay. I just want you to know I miss you. Or I feel so much love toward you and right now I can't get there in my body, but I'm working through my own healing process. Being able to communicate the intent of like I want to connect with you physically, I still care for you, will allow that pathway for attunement and empathy, which is so important when it comes to hope and continuing to heal the relationship and move forward.
So I know oftentimes like the words intimacy and sex are seen as interchangeable, but intimacy is more than just sex, right? It's other
Yeah.
parts of the relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, we have emotional intimacy, we have physical intimacy. We can even go beyond and say we have intellectual intimacy. Intimacy is just being able to see into one another and feel connected and accepted and loved. I think you're right. We conflate the terms. And some of that's because on different platforms we get canceled if we use the real word sex. And so we have to be so careful as people who are, creating content on social media or in different spaces where there are regulations and community standards because we can get smacked down real quick. Because of that, intimacy is a word that a lot of platforms find acceptable. So it does get used a lot. But you're right, that can cause damage because we forget, oh, wait, snuggling in bed and watching a show is actually deep intimacy, or hand holding is intimate. Having a conversation about what we learned today at work is intimate. Being able to broaden that menu is so critical in order to maintain connection in seasons when physical intimacy, the way you've known it before, is not an option.
I didn't think about that too, with not being able to use certain terms on social media. I've seen all kinds of like creative ways to to get around that, but that is a good point that, sometimes you do have to use different terms because yeah, you can't use certain ones on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I'm new to like I'm not really great at social media. I do my best, but I have my friends out there who are really good at it, who educate me on what I can and cannot say, and it is like so overwhelming. But yeah,
I mean, you get it to an extent, but sometimes I'm like, come on, guys, like
yeah,
you go a little overboard, but
it's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, I find that, especially when going through like things like those hard times of life, the infertility, the postpartum, all of those things that starting with the small intimacy seems to be easier. Like just like you said, holding hands, like spending time together, talking, like those things I find to be a lot easier than just jumping straight to the sex.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I create like sex menus for people, for my clients, which I know sounds bizarre to so many. But when you are exhausted and you have so much decision fatigue because you have had to decide what all of the children are wearing and how to get everyone to their events, like sometimes it's just too much to consider. What are the ways that I can engage intimacy? So having a whole list of different ways, not just physical, but emotional, like we could watch a movie together. We could hold hands and go on a walk, like simple little things written out in like a menu where you can decide, like, tonight, here are like three things that I'm open to that would be really connecting for me. What about you? Is really helpful.
I really like that idea. I mean, yeah, it sounds silly if you've never done it before, but when you think about it, like in concept, it's a great idea because then, you're showing these are the things that I'm open to, and then your partner can be like, yeah, I'm open to this too. And then you do something that maybe you wouldn't have even done before.
Yeah, I mean, the evolution of intimacy across the lifespan is something we don't talk enough about because, there's all these popular tests you can take, like love languages, where you determine what your love language is and how your partner receives love, right? And then we kind of get pigeonholed we like assume that we're always going to receive and give love in this way, or we're always going to experience pleasure in these particular regions of our body. And we forget that our entire bodies change drastically with each pregnancy, even if we don't carry to term, even, if it is a baby that's born sleeping, like your body is never the same. You carry cells from that body or from the child in your body. And so I think we need to become more accepting and conversating about this concept of like evolution. Matrescence is the sociological term, the academic term, but of becoming and forever changing and having conversations about like, yeah, let's rewrite this menu every 6 months because that could change. What I'm interested in could change.
Yeah, and I've often find like what you were talking about with earlier with the like the bristle effect. I find that some days I just feel so touched out because I'm, taking care of the kids and everybody's like on me and I'm just like everybody get away from me and I feel like it gets makes me feel like overstimulated and overwhelmed and then I just want to shut down.
Yeah, right. It's important to notice and for partners to be able to have compassion for that because that is what 99% of the moms that at least that I've spoken to will report is that like overwhelm, sensation of having too much touch and needing some sensory rest and being able to normalize that is important.
So I know you work with couples some and with individuals, but do you find that it's harder for women to talk about it or harder for men, or it can be hard for both?
I think it's hard for both in different ways. For women, physical intimacy is really hard to talk about. For some, it's because they don't even know the names of their own, body parts. They've never been taught. They've never been given permission to ask for what they want or take on a more dominant role in the bedroom. So being able to talk about that and consider that is really hard for a lot of women. Though it's also hard for men, I find. What's more difficult and common, I would say, among men is the emotional intimacy, being able to name and discuss feelings because they're often socialized to emote through their bodies. And so they're more able to talk about bodily experiences, which is why sex becomes such a big part of their lives. And their genitals are so important to them because all of their emotional language and expression has been allowed to come out of that little space. And so I find that, and then because of that, so often is like a performance for both in different ways. But when sex becomes a performance and then partners are having a hard time connecting and saying yes or no to one another, it creates, dumpster fires, which is where I get to go in and play.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard all kinds of interesting things. Yeah.
Yeah,
But no, it is really great that there are people like you that they can turn to because, that's not something that people talk to their friends or family about. And if they don't have somewhere to go, then they just don't talk about it to anyone.
it's so true. It's so hard. People don't know where to go. And that's why a lot of people do turn to erotic material online or other formats to obtain information and education. It's getting better. There are more resources out now to be able to ask questions and process these things. But when it comes to sharing vulnerably one's experiences, it's really hard even to do with their own partners often.
Yeah. And as we were talking about earlier, the abstinence only education, that's definitely the kind that I got in school. And I'm just like, okay, when I come out, I'm like, I feel like I know nothing. I just know like you get pregnant or you get an STD. That's what they
All you
teach
left with.
you. And
Yes.
then you don't realize like for so many people, it's actually really hard to get pregnant or, those other things that they just don't talk about.
I don't know how familiar my dissertation was on the purity movement, was a piece of my dissertation, which was a kind of an evangelical movement of the late 90s, early 2000s that really did promote a lot of this abstinence only teaching. And it's just fascinating to hear some of the stories that women share about having no information or misinformation, and their partners learned their information from pornography. And so then they're thrown into the bedroom where there's these high, like, I love how Emily Nagoski says they learned how to drive a car by watching NASCAR. Like, it's not translatable at all. And it's so overwhelming to people. And so it's been really interesting to see how that manifests in the postpartum period among women.
It's so, you just nobody learns the exact same thing. It's kind of like when you get married and you realize that not everybody does things like your family did things,
Yes.
because they're
Yeah.
they're different. And I guess, that's something you don't think about that we learn this type of information in very different ways sometimes.
Hmm. And getting curious about that and how those learning moments impacted your partner and their framework for intimacy is really important throughout conversations. Mhm.
So are there any other like tips or anything that you can give for people who are struggling with intimacy with their partner?
I mean, I think getting sex therapy is always going to be my answer to that because that I'm very biased, or intimacy coaching. But, you know, being really gracious and compassionate with yourself and with your partner, working to decenter yourself. It's really, really hard to not personalize experiences that involve something as vulnerable as our sexuality. And so whether it's, feeling rejected or like you aren't interested in sex, being able to distance yourself from the emotional experience a little bit and get curious about your partner and what could be going on for them. And then broadening that menu, like we talked about, is going to be really important in that timeline, not putting milestones and markers on a timeline that isn't there, like giving yourself grace to say there's no particular period in time when we have to return to this type of touch. And yeah, just being really flexible with one another and going at your pace, the pace that's right for your relationship. Hmm.
So can you only see people in Colorado or do you see people from other states?
I'm licensed in Texas, North Carolina, and Colorado. I'm expanding to offering couples coaching in winter 26, so in January, just because a lot of people have wanted services that center perinatal and faith and some of those components in a variety of areas of the world, and I haven't been able to serve them. So that's why I'm creating that branch of services.
And if people are wanting to find like a sex therapist in their area, is there any kind of directory or place they can go, or how do they find somebody?
So AASECT, AASECT would be, and I can send you, you can put that in the show notes if you do those. It's like probably the most well-known directory, although there are more organizations that are being developed for sexual educators and therapists like myself that are pretty reputable. One thing I would say with your listeners, I'm sure you've heard of Postpartum Support International. Their directory is excellent and probably really relevant. And I would imagine, I actually need to go update my own credentials in their directory, but that some of them you could probably search sex therapy and find some other practitioners in your area who have the education necessary to be able to serve in this way.
I know you went for special education for it. Does everybody have to be certified in that?
So, to be a sex therapist is really interesting. Anyone technically can call themselves a sex therapist. So that's important to know. If you see CST behind someone's name, that stands for certified sex therapist. And that means that they've actually gone through training and supervision and education. Gold standard for a long time has been ASECT certified, so that directory I mentioned. But like I said, other organizations are starting to sprout up kind of competition with that organization that have also some pretty excellent standards. So I would say it's an area that's very much new. If you're a person of specific faith background or cultural background where your personal convictions are really important to you, I would Google, your specific faith and sex therapy to see what comes up, and then just see where that education is from, where they went to school, what they studied, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, those are all important because, like you said, anybody can say anything on the internet. So,
It's so true. It's so true.
yeah, it's good to know like exactly what you need to be looking for.
Yes. And what it all means, all the letters, people get so confused.
I know. Sometimes I'm like, well, I don't know. They went to school for something.
Yeah,
That's all I got from that.
right?
So if
Totally.
people were wanting to connect with you and work with you, do you have a website or where would they go for that?
Yeah, you can follow me on, for right now, it's at Pearl in Process. There are conversations on perhaps changing the name of my business here within the next year. But for now, it's at Pearl in Process, and pearlinprocess.com is my website. But yeah, that handle at Pearl in Process on Instagram and TikTok will get you to me.
I like the name. How'd you come up with that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mentioned that when my daughter was born and I had significant postpartum depression, I would wear pearls every day as like a reminder that beautiful things come from dark places. And I would like make myself get out of bed and put on, if I did nothing else, my jewelry and just walk around the block in pearls and pajamas and just like hope and believe that something good was going to come out of that dark season. And so I ended up naming my business Pearl in Process.
I really love that. I mean, not that you went
Yeah.
through it, but
Yeah.
that you did that and that it was your one positive, hopeful thing that you did that day. If nothing else, like you did that.
Yes, I put on my pearls. Yes, exactly.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share or add about anything?
I don't think so. I just so appreciate the space that you provide. I think it's a topic that goes under discussed and can even be called like taboo in some
Mhm.
spaces. And it's just so important for couples to have hope. And so I'm really grateful for you and the work you're doing. It's so powerful.
Well, thank you. And I felt the same about you because you're also in a taboo area over
Yes, I
there.
am.
And it's something that also is so needed, especially among, people who have gone through loss and deep grief and infertility. So yeah, thank you for what you're doing as well.
Of course. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much to Dr. Hudson for sharing all of this great information with us. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a positive review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.